Welcome back to another Game Time Discussions. I'm Emery Cuzzy. I'm sitting here with Cameron Selby, and today we're going to go over the 2024 NFL playoff contenders, teams that didn't make the playoffs last year that have an opportunity to. We're going to rank them from least. We're not going to give you the best ones first, of course. From least to greatest, who we think will, not make the playoffs, have the worst chances, all the way to the teams that were like, hey, these guys, like, these are the teams that are probably going to be able to make it in, have the best rosters, have the best schedules, even the best odds. I mean, we have playoff odds that we'll talk about, and that gives us an opportunity to just kind of see what the public is thinking too, compared to what we've got on here.
Yeah, and we talked about it when we had a video that we released from the 14 playoff teams, ranking the ones most at risk of missing. Every year, there's 6 to 7 teams, and sometimes even more, that miss the playoffs. It's a very parity-driven league, and usually there's guys that come out of nowhere. Last year, Houston was, and several others that are usually kind of on the bubble, and they just kind of swap spots every year. Well, this year there was a ton of injuries last year also, where you had teams like Cincinnati and the Chargers who had been playoff teams before for a couple seasons, and they just, you know, kind of seemed like by default out of it, even though at least Cincinnati was formidable in terms of record. Again, we're going to go through all 18 teams that missed and talk about their potential and if they can possibly make some noise.
Yeah, so starting it off, this is the looking to 2025 group, and kind of what that means in our book is like there's a team on here that I definitely think needs to target quarterback in the next draft. And then there's a couple of other teams that just got their quarterbacks. So it's just one of those, like, you shouldn't expect much. They're playing, they have tough schedules. You look at the New England Patriots, tied for eighth toughest schedule. You look at the New York Giants, tied for sixth toughest strength of schedule. And their odds reflect it. Plus 900 for New England is the worst, I believe, out of every
By
team.
far.
But yeah, by far. And then the next is the Denver Broncos at plus 700. So this whole group, they're looking at like how to rebuild. Biggest thing here, you look at the Denver Broncos. Let's talk about them for a second. They have a contract issue. They have to pay Russ. They have to eat it, and that made them worse automatically. So they're waiting until next year for that reason too. So
Right. And, we're not taking the standard crazy on any of these. I mean, Denver and New England both have two of the lowest win totals and the highest playoff odds, or to make the playoffs, the worst odds, rather. The Giants are actually a couple spots above this, but there's just so much uncertainty at quarterback. Daniel Jones and Drew Lock, and it's just a whole lot of blah. It's got, I would say, what is the worst offense in football right now, and it's just hard to fathom or see them scoring points. Uh, that's not to say that any of them will be flirting with being winless, but all of these teams will be looking more likely than not to be, somewhere in the top 5 in next year's draft. And you're only going to get that from being one of the worst teams in the league.
right, and a lot of this stuff too. We talked about before. We talked about teams that were most likely to go from worst to first in their division. Well, a team that wasn't last in their division is the Giants, but they are at plus 1400, which is the lowest in the East to win their division. Plus 1400 versus plus 400 odds is a little crazy to me to make the playoffs versus win the East. That's just ridiculous. So, yeah, I think this group is pretty easy. Patriots just have one of the worst rosters in football. Giants, one of the most dysfunctional organizations currently in football. And then the Broncos, they're just rebuilding because they have such a big issue at quarterback at the moment or not at quarterback, but paying their ex quarterback that's not even there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So they're pretty easy three to sell. But the next group is a little bit better. A little bit better. They're contingent on young quarterback development. First quarterback we're talking about, Bryce Young, worst quarterback rookie season in history. They had some weapons though. Jatavian Sanders, Deontay Johnson, bring back Adam Thielen, and then get Jonathan Brooks. It's looking up. It's not good. It's looking up. So
Yeah, with Carolina, just not many people are on them, but again, they're tied for one of the easiest strengths of schedules in football. They are in the easiest division. We talked about them and even the Titans and Commanders on our worst to first video because we're ranking candidates who could potentially make the playoffs, and they were actually above Tennessee and Washington. That doesn't mean that we think they're better or they'll have a better record. We're just saying that they're in the worst division. They have a great schedule or very favorable one, and they did improve their roster.
Hmm.
Made some additions on the offensive line. Basically, added skill additions at each level, tight end, running back, and receiver. So I expect them to be better. I don't expect Bryce Young to just be the worst quarterback again. If that does happen, they're going to be back in the top five again and probably taking the quarterback again. Um, but right now, it just kind of sets up to where there'll be a formidable 6-win team that could still be one of the bottom five in the league. But they're going to be better than people think, and the odds are reflecting that. The juice is on the over of 5.5 wins. Of the teams that are in the bottom four, they have um, very reasonable odds to get there at -124, at least according to Vegas Insider. Playoff wise, obviously, all these teams are much to be considered long shots, I guess, to
Hmm.
make the playoffs, but you got to throw them in there. And then with Tennessee, they're a team that's just much better, but they're just in a tough division. We said it when we were trying to decipher between Washington and Tennessee. Well, head to head, I don't think Tennessee's better than Indy. I don't think they're better than Jacksonville, and I don't think they're better than Houston. Um, so really, it's basically almost impossible to have your entire division make the playoffs. Last year, we saw the AFC North be the closest to it,
Hmm.
and possibly could have if Joe Burrow hadn't gotten hurt. However, you can't rely on being the fourth place team in your division, hopefully getting the 7th seed. I just don't really see the path for them. But of this group, reasonable strength of schedule, and Will Levis, they set him up to succeed, and we
Hmm.
don't know if he will, take those reins and run with it. But you got all the pass catches in the world. You've got a better and improving offensive line. You've got a more offensive minded coach. Um, they should at least be formidable and throwing some upsets in here and there. But it'll be interesting to see with them for sure.
Yeah, opportunity is there for them for sure. And then with the Commanders, Jaden Daniels, rookie, second round pick, going to a completely a new team. Shoot, not even just coaches, but offense, defense, team. The whole thing is new. Giving him an opportunity. Good receivers there still, but their defense is lackluster, and that's really what hurts them more than anything. That's why they're down here. And then you get the Minnesota Vikings, and their situation's a little weird because Sam Darnold's their starting quarterback. We haven't seen him be very good in the NFL, but he still has upside. Don't write off Sam Darnold. He was a top pick for that reason. He has a great arm. He has to put it together mentally, and he could. I mean, he went to a really hard situation at the Jets when he got there. One of the worst situations in football. That is always difficult, and so strength of schedule wise, right in the middle. Playoff odds plus 300. They also have a really tough division. I mean, that makes it even harder to make the playoffs if your division is just, set up with killers everywhere. So,
Right. And again, through 13 games last year, they were 7-6.
hmm.
So even with, Josh Dobbs and then Nick Mullins and,
Right.
what they were trying to do post Kirk Cousins going down, they were still good. And, they're well coached. It's just, I don't know what their quarterback situation will look like. And again, the division's kind of just too tough to even put them in consideration. But if they did, it would be at the detriment of another team that would miss the playoffs that probably we wouldn't have expected because everybody else in that division is minus money to make the playoffs.
Right. Absolutely. And then next up, competitive teams stuck in limbo. I think that's a completely fair statement. It's just you look at the Saints. Their offensive line is worse than it was last year. Just horrible.
PFF ranked them the 32nd ranked offensive line this year,
Yeah,
and that was
I
post
agree.
Ryan Ramczyk missing the entire season. They've had multiple linemen being benched that are going to now have to start once again, and it's going to be in for a rough ride. But they're too good to just be at the very bottom unless they just completely sell off their vets, at the midpoint. But I mean, they re-signed Demario Davis and Tyrann Matthew, so they're going to be good enough to compete. They have tied for the easiest strength of schedule, again in the easiest division, with Carolina and Tampa Bay and Atlanta. So you can't really count them out, but it seemed like everybody else in that division took a step up, whereas they're taking a step back. And they could win it by default, but I just kind of anticipate that they will be one of the teams to pull back this year.
Yeah, and then and plus 170 odds are solid odds. I mean, for a team that's 11th and lower on our board, of course, and what we think, like plus 170 is really solid. Next is the Raiders. We're plus 300 and we're tied for eighth hardest schedule. But we have good football players at every level. We have a good offensive line. We have a good running. Well, we have sorry, not a running back. We had a good running back. We have good tight ends. We have good receivers. We have a running back that we hope is good. Defensively, Max Crosby. It's just we have good players. And so that is kind of frustrating because it's all comes down to quarterback play in the NFL, and we just don't have that.
The positive thing for the Raiders is that they are above average in the trenches on both sides of the ball, which is nice.
Mm-hmm.
However, the only thing is just quarterback situation. Once again, you just kind of go into just unknown. I mean, last year they signed Jimmy G. He gets benched, and then it's just back and forth and just kind of awkwardness. And then this year they signed Gardner Minshew, and now he is no longer favored to be the starter week 1. So it's just like you're going into the season with a bottom 3 quarterback situation. Yes, you won 8 games last year, but you're going to need to probably 10 is probably a sweet spot for AFC since it's a tougher
right.
Conference, and I just can't picture a situation or a scenario where they get that high.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's really hard because, like you said, we have, we brought in Christian Wilkins. We have a good defensive line. We have a good offensive line. We win in those ways, but I can't believe Gardner Minshew is the greatest backup ever. Like as a backup, he cannot start. So I'm okay with it as long as it works out where he has to come in. But we don't wish injuries on anybody.
Yeah, and then we'll kind of little brief tidbit about Seattle. It's interesting with them. You know, it's the first season in a decade and a half without Pete Carroll.
Yeah.
A lot of transition, and again, kind of a purgatory at quarterback. Geno Smith had a great 2022 comeback season. You should never want to come back as the player of the year for sucking in your previous, tenure as a quarterback. But regardless, he had a crazy season. Then last year took a step back a little bit. They finished kind of so-so. Arizona is now back and Tyler's healthy. I probably would barely side with Arizona over them. But they have a reasonable strength of schedule, plus 190 to make the playoffs. It'll be an interesting team, but I don't know. It's just hard to like them more than any other team in that division. But even maybe that's a little bit surprising, and you'll see that on the next slide when we talk about Arizona.
Yeah. So actually, moving up, I think Arizona's 8. So yep, there they are. Arizona tied for the 24th strength of schedule. Very good. Plus 300. I think that's a little rough. I don't think that's fair, but that's okay. Maybe we'll take a bet on them at plus 300 because those seem like good odds. Arizona got better though. That's the thing. Like their defense is not that great, but offensively they get Marvin Harrison Jr. Trey McBride's coming into his 3rd year. That's always a solid thing. Kyler Murray's back. Played 4 games last year, so he'll play hopefully more than that this year. And it just Jonah Williams, right tackle, added to the team. It's just they feel like they're getting better. They tried really hard this offseason to make a push. They're in a tough division, but at the same time, like I could see they're also in the NFC. I could see them winning 9 games. I could see them pushing for 10 games. 24th strength of schedule. That doesn't seem like something that you shouldn't be able to overcome. Basically,
yeah, and with them, they're going to have a very below average defense, and it's going to have to be outscoring teams to win. But they now have an offense capable of doing that. We've seen Arizona be a top 6-7 offense before Kyler Murray's injury, and he's back, and so I expect them to improve from 19.5 points a game, which was bottom half of the league, or bottom third of the league, even worse. They should be right around 10 to 12 or better offensively, and I don't think that there'll be a pushover with anybody in their division. I think they match up well, and so it just kind of depends. I think they're a sneaky wild card team, hence the title of the tier.
mm-hmm.
But yeah, we just kind of see a path for it, and they're obviously really solid at quarterback, and there's an avenue there for sure.
And they get a 4th place schedule, and that's always helpful. Like they get, of course, New England, Carolina, Washington, all these other 4th place teams. that they'll get to play. So that makes it a little bit easier, a little bit more understanding of why they should probably be better than plus 300.
And most of the tough games are in the first half of the year because you in the year you have Seattle 2 times in 3 weeks. You got Minnesota, New England, Carolina,
It's 5 winnable
and then
games.
Rams and the 49ers at home to end the season, who could be very well resting. Who knows? But regardless, they could finish strong to the season, and um, it just kind of depends on how strong the other teams are in the conference.
Right.
But there's a path there for sure, like we said.
Yeah, and then jumping over to the Indianapolis Colts, there's just a lot of question marks around them, and I think a lot of people are trying to put them automatically into the playoffs, like as the like 6, 7 seed, and they're a sneaky wildcard team because they have question marks because we don't know what Anthony Richardson really is. People want to tell us what he is and think that they have a really good idea, but we have not seen it, not long enough, not like there is not a big enough sample size to say that he is any better than a guy that Cam mentions in Trey Lance, comparatively. Like, why would we say that he is if they're both picked at I think they were both the number 3 pick, right? Or was Anthony Richardson 4?
He
Was he 4?
Yeah, he was
Okay.
4. Sorry.
Okay. So 1 pick difference, both same size, athleticism, bad arms in college. I don't see what the difference is truly, and so that makes a lot of sense there.
Yeah. Again, I if there's any team of the 18 that I'm most nervous about ranking too low, it's probably the Colts because they played really, really well last year uh, with Gardner Minshew at the helm, and now he's not there. But regardless, they're a very talented roster. The only thing is they didn't really add anything. They just kind of re-signed guys, had a fine class, rookie class. We really love their pass rusher that they got. He was the top on our board.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I see them as another 8-9 win team again. Again, I don't think that's enough in the AFC, but I can't really write them off,
Right.
even within the division, just because they can get hot or they can play at their own pace, which is I don't know if anybody else in that division can do that if things aren't going their way.
Well, I think, we just talked about the plus 300 odds on Arizona. Like, I'd much rather side with the plus 300 than the plus 140 going to Indianapolis because I'm more comfortable in the NFC and a 4th place schedule versus a 2nd place schedule for Indy. Like, it's just, it reads a little bit better. It's a little bit more comfortable. With that being said,
He
though.
was the 4th pick. But either way, top 4.
Yeah.
Either way, top 4 pick. Similar situation, similar lack of sample size.
Yeah.
It's just we've seen recently when he was 18 points a game in fantasy, and people think that he's ready to take a leap from just 2.5 games essentially.
Yeah, and then going into the Los Angeles Chargers, new coach, new coaches across the board. They don't really have a wide receiving core that is comfortable, of course, but they want to run the ball. They go get Joe Alt. They get the guy that can help them run the ball in the draft. And we'll see. I mean, I like their defense in the Chargers. Like, I think their defense is solid. But they're going to need some Jim Harbaugh love on that defense because they have been so bad at stopping the run. Don't know how Brandon Staley had a job for so long because he's a defensive guy and they could not stop the run. They got, what was it? I remember it was a few years back when they played New England in the conference finals, I want to say. They had like 280 rushing yards put up on them. And that was like the last time I was just okay with them. Even it was in 2021. I believe. So,
yeah, and with them, like their odds, if you think it's crazy, like plus 110 is really, really high for what I think their situation is. I mean, their offense is kind of really under development from the skill player perspective, and so I think they're just kind of going to be a I think they're just going to be a really solid, we can win and control the clock and win our own way. And I think the biggest thing is coaching upgrade with Jim Harbaugh. And then he brought his DC Jesse Minter with Michigan, who was the number 1 defense in the nation last year, has a talented defense. We like their rookie class. We've talked about them time and time again throughout the summer for all the guys that they brought in from that class. Really solid offensive line, especially from the tackle spot now. And, it just kind of depends on how well their young guys can develop offensively. But obviously they're plus 110 for a reason. They're one of the bigger betting favorites to now make a wild card spot. I don't. They were the second to worst to first team, and obviously that's slightly controversial based on the talent. But it's just because we don't think that they're close to Kansas City yet, but they're probably a year away, and they could probably be a sneaky team that maybe pull some upsets there, especially um, you know with the higher ups in this conference.
Well, yeah, and I mean, we don't. The biggest problem with them making the playoffs to me is the fact that we've talked about it before. Is I just don't see them beating the Chiefs. Like the Chiefs are going to win the division, and so that means they have to get a um, wild card spot. And oh my gosh, I'm trying to find these stats for y'all, but I am not going to be able to. It looks like they've got 41 points put up on them, 41 to 28 against the Patriots is what I was trying to talk about when they were just getting run on. But I am not going to be able to find the stats right now. But that's okay. And so it's just like with them, it's like they have to get a wild card spot, and it's really tough right now in the AFC. So it's like it's just a little nerve wracking to me. So yeah, in the next tier we got we're starting at 5 with the Jacksonville Jaguars plus 130, reasonable, solid team, nothing spectacular. You know, you look at their defense, got a really young pass rushing core, which is really good. You know, but they need to be more effective on offense, I guess is the best way to put it. Trevor Lawrence has to do better. Like we said in the past, they were 8-3 to start out the year, which is really solid. But it all comes down to Trevor Lawrence. Like if he's good, they will look like they should have been minus 200. So,
Yeah, the biggest problem with them, on top of falling apart last year, is that Trevor Lawrence really didn't take a step up.
mhm.
He really kind of had a rough year, even before all the injuries started happening, and just was not playing well, just flat out. And they were winning in spite of that. And then once they just kind of broke down, they were like, okay, take us there. And then he got injured, and maybe that had a little bit to do with that, but is definitely not going to be the most popular team in our top 5 for sure. I guarantee most people have the Chargers in front of them, maybe even Indy. But regardless, they were still a 9-win team last year. In spite of all that, Doug Marrone will be coaching for his job, and I just expect them to be right in the thick of the wild card race. In spite of the top 10 strength of schedule that they have, they should be there. Houston should not just tread lightly because Indy or Jacksonville can snap them up just like that. They were that close
Right.
last year, so they'll be right there. It's hard to just kind of put a ton of confidence until we just kind of see it again.
And like we talked about in the past, like they have to play I'm sorry. Trevor Lawrence has the highest salary for
Yeah,
quarterback in
just got
football.
extended.
Tied for the highest salary in football. So he has to produce. Like otherwise that salary and all the coaching staff will be gone, and it's just one of those things where they'll have to clean house and start over. And I think they're too talented to have to do that. Like they just are. They got a number 1 overall pick on defense. And then Josh Allen got extended this offseason. So they have both of their edge rushers for the future for a little while. And it's just they have too much talent. And I like their picks. I like their receiving core. I think they're more balanced than they were last year. Now that they have, Gabe Davis was overpaid, but that's okay because they got Brian Thomas and it worked out that way. But yeah, I think it's a team that could get better. And like I said, if they play well, if Trevor Lawrence plays well, they will be minus 200, possibly the winners in this division. So, and then the New York Jets, a team that I'm pushing a lot for, minus 160, tied for the 12th hardest schedule. Doesn't matter because the rest of the teams in their division are tied for, or are almost worse off. So with the Jets, I don't think that Aaron Rodgers has to play that well. He just plays okay.
Mhm.
And their defense keeps them in every game, basically. And that's the biggest thing for me.
With the Jets, they've kind of gone through 2 straight years of having a top 10 defense and winning 7 games in
Mm-hmm.
spite of some of the worst quarterback play we've ever seen. It's just been atrocious. And like you said, there doesn't have to be spectacular play. And then also they can really get off to a really strong start, even though they have a modest strength of schedule. It is an absolutely wide open division, but you start on the road against San Fran, just chalk it as a loss, for example. But Tennessee, New England, Denver right after that, and then Minnesota. All teams projected to be 4th in their division. and then a home game Monday Night Football against Buffalo, and then Pittsburgh and New England. So you can go into a home game on a short week against Houston and possibly be, 7-2, and it's just like you're just already right there. I see them getting out to a hot start. Um, Again, it's completely relying on Aaron Rodgers and his health, but they definitely probably have the best overall roster in that division. It's just the most important position is the one that they have not nailed for some time.
Yep, quarterback. And then going to the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta, they just happened to luck into the 31st strength of schedule along with the rest of their division rivals. But they are the most talented team in the division, and they only need 9 wins to win that division. Minus 190, I don't love it. That's way too high.
It's
Like,
awful.
I mean, I don't understand it, but that's okay. Like, you just, in retrospect, I could see why people feel that way and why it's being bet that way. But it's like, you need to stop sooner or later when you're like, okay, now we're getting too far into the weeds. You get a plus, what is it, 300 team in Tampa Bay right now. I'd rather take those odds, I guess. But
I
yeah,
mean, yeah, it's just way too easy of a schedule. It's one of the easier teams I think we can predict, just chalk and win loss, just because it's like they're going to lose to teams like Philly and Kansas City, and then they've got a bunch of home games against teams like Pittsburgh and Seattle and Dallas, and then road games against Denver and Minnesota, the Raiders, the Washington Commanders. Like none of those are just even close to L's for sure. I mean, of course they could drop a couple of them, but um, they're going to by default jump into 9 and 10 wins, and that's going to be enough to win the division. That's why they're this high. They're probably would be 7 or 8 if we
right.
were just top 16 teams go or top 14 teams. But they're in the driver's seat in the division. That's why they got to be ranked this high.
Yep. And then for the final two teams, we're gonna lock it in. We're we're selling out. Chicago Bears are going to be in the playoffs this year. And I have lots of reasons. Give me 1 second as I go find their schedule because it's telling. It's absolutely telling of why this is a possibility. And when it comes to Chicago, 29th ranked strength of schedule makes it more reasonable to even think this way. And then also, like they have some very, very fourth place schedule gives them very like fourth place teams in the division in the conference, of course. I just want to read some of the teams off to you. They're gonna so week one at home against Tennessee, and then they go to Houston, Indy, play at home against the Rams. Then they get Carolina. So and then Jacksonville at home. I think out of those games, we could say 5-2. What do you think? 5-2,
Yeah, at worst 4-3, but
right?
5-2 is probably what I would predict.
Okay. And then they come off of the bye and they get Washington, Arizona, New England. And then they get a home game against Green Bay. Big games, they always play good against rivals and in division rivals. Then they get a home game against Minnesota, another in division rival. Let's say they lose both games to Detroit. That's fine. Whatever. Say they lose to San Francisco. I don't expect them to lose both games to Detroit, but say they do. Lose to San Francisco, split with Minnesota, split with Green Bay. Right now, I would say they're at what, 9-4. Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, so what do you have to do? Win half the games that you have left, and you're basically
I
have to be
just
in.
I don't see a way, as long as Caleb Williams is healthy, that they don't win 10 games.
Right.
Again, they were a 7-win team last year in spite of, the quarterback play that they had and injuries and what have you. Um, Such easy breaks. There you can't really find other than a San Francisco. And I can't even though we want to give Detroit a sweep, I can't even say that because last year Chicago should have swept Detroit
Right.
and they gave one away at the end, and then they won the other one, fairly handily. Um, they've played their strength against Detroit, and I believe they swept them the year before, at least split them. So yeah, there's not a ton of games that it's just like, oh yeah, that's a loss. And when you don't have many of those games, and that's the teams that usually kind of overachieve and perform. And so I would expect them to be a wild card team this year. And I know you were saying that you wanted to have them a tier back, but we've been talking them up all year. We need to take a stand like we are. and just finally put our pick in, because I guarantee you when we do our win-loss predictions and our 2024 overall predictions, they will be in the playoffs. They will have 10 wins, and I don't know if they'll win a playoff game, but they're going to be there in January.
Right. And then one thing I will add, they are playing at Green Bay in week 18, and that game is going to be so big
That's
because
probably the biggest game if I need to project it, just because, again, we've talked about Chicago, Green Bay, Dallas, and the Rams. Only 3 of those teams can go. And if 2 of them are in the same division, could very well be a chance that that's a winner go home game.
that's the tiebreaker game. You're in the playoffs in week 18, boys and girls. So that should be really exciting. And that's why, we want to lock them in. I mean, even if they lose to Green Bay in that week, I still think they're in, just overall record wise. But then you got the number 1 team, the Cincinnati Bengals. The odds agree with us, minus 260. That is just insane for a team that was last in their division last year. But that is also the hardest division in football. 9-8 last year without Joe Burrow for most of the year. Tied for 16th strength of schedule. All the other teams are in the top 5, I believe, in strength of schedule. So that gives them a huge edge. And as much as we talk about it, I could see Cincinnati being the number 2 overall team in the AFC. Not just possibly fighting for a bye. That's how much better I think this team is than the fact that they didn't make the playoffs last year.
Yeah, I mean, they, again, the team that won a bunch of games in spite of their situation, they only missed the playoffs because of Joe Burrow going down, and then also was not healthy to come into the season. It's an unprecedented wrist injury, so I don't even know how long term I could even project that. But the biggest thing is just he's back,
Mm-hmm.
and I just trust him more than almost every other quarterback in the AFC, and that includes Lamar Jackson, who is the reigning MVP. And I could get a flag for saying that, because in the regular season, Lamar is one of the winningest quarterbacks ever, but he has not shown up in the postseason. And again, this is just to make the playoffs thing. This doesn't mean that they have to supplant the Ravens to make it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not saying that we're picking them to win the division, which is on the table. But I mean, there's a reason that their over under is 10.5 wins. They're one of 7 teams that have that, and they're juiced.
Yeah.
So
I mean, they could really fight for the number 1 overall spot in the AFC. Like, that would not surprise me in any way. Schedule wise too. You think about how difficult the other teams in their division schedules are. You have to look at it like this. New England week 1 should be, a win. Play KC. Then they get Washington and Carolina. So they're 3-1 at worst, most likely 4-0, or 50-50 to be 4-0. Play Baltimore, New York Giants. That's a win in my book. Cleveland, they're going to split. Philly, Raiders, Baltimore, and then the Chargers. I mean, they could go first 11 weeks. I mean, I don't see why they couldn't go 9-2.
mm-hmm.
And then coming off of that, just getting teams like Tennessee, Denver.
Yeah, just because I feel like every year through September they've been 500 at best with Joe Burrow, so they do get off to slow starts. So I'm not going to chalk up an easy 3 or 4-1 start. But the biggest thing is getting Kansas City and Baltimore out of the way before we even get to the bulk of the schedule. Because at the end of we talk all about Pittsburgh and Cleveland having an absolute gauntlet to end the season, and with Cincinnati, you've got road games against Dallas and Tennessee. I don't even know if they'll be dogs in either of those games. Right now, probably preseason wise, they'll probably be dogs in Dallas game, but I would pick Cincinnati to win that game. Then you have home games against Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Denver, and then at Pittsburgh again.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably as good as you can ask for the division that you're in terms of the schedule. And like you said, if you start 9-2, I don't see a bunch of losses there either. So they could very well be a 12, 13 win team, and that upside is why they're juiced to be 260 to make the playoffs.
Yep, 13 wins was number 1 last year in the Baltimore Ravens, and I don't think why it's impossible. I don't see why it's impossible. But yeah, so that's the end of our tiering for the 2024 playoff contenders, the candidates that are coming that didn't make it last year. We appreciate y'all hanging out with us. Hopefully y'all agree with a lot of these picks, but if you disagree, please tell us in the comments. Don't just Don't just make fun of us and disagree with us and then not tell us why. We appreciate y'all's conversation and telling us about your teams and all those teams that y'all root for and don't root for. Of course, we love those too. We love the guys that hate on the Bears because they're Green Bay fans and stuff like that. So
Yeah, we appreciate you guys. Please, interact with us. That's the main thing that we're going after. I want to hear who your lock is. I mean, Cincinnati is kind of a cop out just because of how juiced they are, and they were a by default missed the playoff team. But Chicago is kind of a stand. I know they're minus money now, but there's a lot of people. I even had a draft where somebody was a person in our league was just like, "There's no chance that Chicago makes it," and it's just like, "There's no chance they don't make it," in my eyes. And I could be wrong about that. So if I am wrong, tell me who your lock is.
yeah,
Who is the guy or team you're taking a stand on? Because at the end of the day, 6 or 7 of these teams will be in the postseason this year if it's going based on trend. So we want to hear those teams. We'll also be doing a bunch of fantasy content coming up. Rankings 2.0. We'll have predictions at the end of August. All that fun stuff. We want you guys to interact, enjoy, and then again, live streams every Wednesday, and then Sunday morning once football season starts up.
yeah, we'll have live streams. Yeah, we're gonna do a power rankings video. I think that's everybody's favorite. So we'll get one of those in before the season starts, and yeah, we'll get as many videos in as we can, talking about preseason, talking about fantasy, talking about best ball, before the season starts, and then when the season starts, it's go 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 go. So we will talk to y'all next time. We appreciate y'all hanging out.